Deutero and Trito-Zechariah. So we understand that Zechariah, like Isaiah, can be divided into various parts. Chapter 1 through 8 is Proto-Zechariah. Verses 9 through 14 are another work, are another author or two. So 9 through 14 differ from the first chapters in language, style, theological outlook, and historical reference. It could be further divided into chapters 9 through 11. So when we hear Deutero-Zechariah, Deutero-Zechariah means Zechariah 9 to 11. Trito-Zechariah means Zechariah 12 through 14. Zechariah could be dated from the period of Alexander the Great, roughly 333 BC, to the time of the Maccabees, roughly 165 BC, meaning we don't know when Deutero and Trito-Zechariah were written, but it was likely written sometime during this period. Zechariah is problematic because there are a number of allegories that we have no idea how to understand them. The meaning of many references is unclear, but a bit of the context during this time period, from 333 to 165, the bright prophecies of Ezekiel and Deutero-Isaiah was all hopeful about there being a future glorious day. You know what? It ain't happened. Follow me? And so a lot of the hoped-for rebuilding has been a disappointment, and that's just where we are, right? Isaiah talked about this glorious day. It hasn't happened yet. The nations around Judah continue to cause problems. Remember our hated Edomites to the south of us. Local leaders have failed our people, which probably resulted in this image of worthless shepherds in Deutero-Zechariah. And so Deutero-Zechariah's message, chapter 9, is a condemnation of Israel's neighbors, people like the Syrians and the Phoenicians and the Philistines, and also a prophecy of the redemption of Israel. Chapter 10, a praise of God who brings the blessing of rain. How interesting. What did we talk about before? The drought in Jerusalem. Why do we have a drought in Jerusalem? Because you're building your homes instead of God's temple. So chapter 10, a praise of God who brings the blessing of rain. Also talks about God's anger at the leaders and false diviners. God's victories for Judah and Ephraim, another word for Israel in the north. Chapter 11 is an allegory of an angry God. And we really don't know how to interpret this chapter, but it talks about shepherds and flocks and two staves that are broken. Trito-Isaiah, the message there in chapter 12 is a major attack on Jerusalem by the nations of the world. Talk about doom and gloom. All the nations of the world coming and attacking Jerusalem. They will fail. Chapter 13, purification and denunciation. How it is that false prophecy will end and the wicked will be punished and the virtuous will be purged. And finally, chapter 14, the last book of Zechariah, the longest and most enigmatic chapter, the most problematic chapter, talks about the siege and the defeat of Jerusalem, but then how it is that God is going to make war on the nations. The Mount of Olives will be split in two, and then the king is going to come in on a donkey riding into Jerusalem, and God will rule the universe. What did all of the writers of the Christian scriptures, when they read Zechariah, they said, wait a minute, if Jesus is the Messiah, how does he have to come into Jerusalem? On a donkey. You follow me? Zechariah had this vision of God coming in, and so all of the gospel writers were influenced by that. Where do we see Deutero and Trito-Zechariah in the Christian scriptures? Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, the image of the king riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, that is Jesus coming into town. They read the prophets. They said, okay, there are certain things that Jesus had to do. If he is the Messiah, he must come from Bethlehem. And he must come out of Nazareth. He must come up out of Egypt. And he must come riding in on a donkey. They pulled all of these stories together, and in their stories, they wrote a story of Jesus coming in on a donkey. From Zechariah, we also get the image of 30 shekels of silver. How much did Judas betray Jesus for? 30 shekels. Where did that come from? The book of Zechariah as well. Deutero and Trito-Isaiah. Zechariah. Deutero and Trito-Zechariah. Text study, Zechariah chapter 14, verses 6 to 21. Zechariah, the title of this chapter is The Lord Comes and Reigns. Verse 6, on that day there will be neither sunlight nor cold, frosty darkness. It will be a unique day, a day known only to the Lord with no distinction between day and night. When evening comes, there will be light. The day will be like night, the night will be like day. On that day, living water will flow out of Jerusalem. Verse 9, the Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day, there will be one Lord, and his name, the only name. Flashing forward, Judah will fight at Jerusalem. Verse 14. Number 15, a similar plague will strike the horses and the mules. Number 16, the survivors from all the nations that have attacked Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the king and to celebrate the feast. And if they don't, there will be no rain. How it is that we have this image of how it is that in the end, God will rule in Jerusalem over all the peoples. And so long as the people worship the Lord, all will end happily ever after.